In this lecture, we'll be talking about nested routes. Well, it's probably me who's going to do most of the talking, but you get the point. So what are nested routes? Nested routes are basically a way of grouping routes together using URL segments. I want to expand a bit on our e-commerce application by adding a component which displays reviews for a given product. This gives us two routes with a similar URL structure, the product details page and this new reviews page. They both share the same base path, being /products/id. It would make sense for them to be grouped together with this base path, followed by either /details or /reviews. Since we might have even more subpages for a product, this seems like a good design choice. There are a couple of things you need to know in regards to nested routes, but I will get back to that as we go along, because now we need to restructure our application a bit for implementing nested routes. First off, let's create a new component named product reviews. So products reviews.vue. I'm just going to add a super simple template within this file because I don't want to spend time making it dynamic based on which particular product we're viewing, because that's not really related to nested routes specifically. But that would be a good exercise if you want to get more hands-on experience with using routes. Anyways, let's just add a paragraph for the template. Okay, so what we'll do besides grouping routes together based on the URL path is that we'll be adding a new router view tag. Remember that we already have a router view tag within the app.vue file, being this one that you see right here. And this is the place where the matched route is being displayed or being rendered. That was for the root route, so we need an additional tag for nested routes. The way it works with nested routes is that when a nested route is matched, this route component is rendered in place of a router view tag within the parent route component's template. I hope that didn't sound too confusing. So we will have some markup that is shared between the nested routes, although it's certainly possible to just have a template consisting of a router view tag. Again, I hope that made just a little bit of sense. If not, I hope it will make sense in a moment when we implement it. So we need a parent route for these nested routes. I will add a product component for that, which will then contain a router view tag, where nested routes will be rendered. This component will contain most of what is currently within the Vue product component, such as the back button and related products, so we'll be copying some code over. First, let's create this new component, named product. Within this component, I want to display the back button, product name, and related products. Like I said before, this is all something we had already added within the Vue product component, so we can just go ahead and move the markup and code from there. So let's open up that file. So first, let's work on the template and move the back button, headline, and related products. So I'll actually just copy the entire template. And with that out of the way, let's move some JavaScript code. In fact, I can just copy the whole thing and remove the go back method as well as the computed property. So let's copy it and paste it here. And like I said, remove the go back method as well as the computed property. Before moving on, I just noticed that I copied a bit more than I wanted in the template, so I'll just leave it at this. And with that, we're almost ready to change our routes. But let's first add the router view tag that I was talking about earlier. So let's do that right here, router-view. And this is where the nested routes, being either the product details or product reviews components, will be rendered. And with that, we're ready to work on our routes. So let's open up the route.js file. I'll begin by importing the new components just to get that out of the way. So first, the product component. And the product reviews component. The way we add nested routes is by adding a children property to a given route, which is also why you might hear nested routes being referred to as child routes. This property should be an array of route objects of the same structure as the routes we've added so far. Nested routes can in turn have nested routes, so you can nest them as deep as you need. So let's change the route that we have already added for the Vue product component and make it use the product component and also change its name. So first, its name, I'll just name it products. Leave this props set to true. And I'll just change the component to product. This route will serve as the base route, so to speak. So the view for the product component will be used, and one of the nested routes that we have yet to add will be rendered in place of this component's router view tag. So let's add the two nested routes. We do this by adding the children key, like I said before, and that's going to be an array of route objects or route entries. And the first one is going to have a path of details, a name of Vue products. Let's set the props to true again, because we want to pass the product ID. And the components will be Vue product. Next up, the reviews route. So reviews as the path. And then product reviews as the name. And product reviews for the component as well. A key thing that I want to mention now is that if you have a default view for the parent component, then you can add a nested route with an empty path to match the path of the parent route. In this case, it would be useful if we didn't want to render the product component's template when navigating to /products/product ID, because in that case, no content would be inserted in place of the router view tag. So to use an entirely different component for this scenario, we could add a new nested route with an empty path, and this route would be matched instead. Another important thing to note is that I did not add a leading slash to the nested routes. When this slash is omitted, this means that we are appending to the parent route, and the slash is implicit. Had we specified a slash, that would mean that the path would no longer be relative to the parent route, but to the global path. So had I entered /details, this path would immediately follow the domain name in the URL and would be called a root path. Alright, so now we have created and adjusted the components we need, as well as changed our routes appropriately. The next thing I want to do is to add some navigation links to the product component's template. This component's template will be rendered for all of the nested routes, so I want to be able to navigate to the reviews or details views. So let's go back to the product component and add some navigation just below the header and separate it with a break line. And it's going to be an unordered list with some bootstrap classes. And the first one will be a router link. Well, both of them are going to be a router link tag. So let's begin to add some attributes. The first one is a presentation class. Then the to attribute being an object, and that's why I used the vbind directive. The name will be Vue product, and this is the name of the route that we just added, being a nested route. And a params object, because we need to pass in the product ID. And we'll use the product.id property. The tag needs to be li, and the active class should be active. And let's just add an empty link or anchor tag. I'll set that to details. So the router link component will automatically add an href attribute to this link. Now I can just copy this just to avoid typing out the same thing all over again. Let's change the name of the route to product reviews. And we also need to pass in the product ID, so I'll leave that. And the last thing we have to do is just to change the name, or rather the text on the link, to reviews. Okay, so now we're actually done. But what about the places where we're linking to the products? Don't we need to update these? Luckily no, because we use the Vue product route name for generating these links. And although we changed the structure of the routes, we left this particular route name intact. This means that the links will automatically be updated to the new path, so we don't need to do anything. As you can see, it already paid off to use a route name, as I mentioned earlier. The second takeaway here is that navigating programmatically or using the router link component is exactly the same with nested routes as with any other routes. Enough talking and changing the code, let's see the changes in action. Okay, let's navigate to a product. So this doesn't look quite right. I have two back buttons and the product name output twice. So let me just go back and figure out what's wrong and remove one of them. I'll just remove the header and the back button from the Vue product component and try again. At least that looks a bit better. So let's try to switch between the two nested routes. And as you can see, that works well. And notice how the UL is changing. And also that we landed on the details page. So notice the URL right here. But what if I modify the URL manually and remove this path right here for the nested route? Let's see. In this case, nothing is rendered for the router view tag. So this is why I mentioned earlier that you can add a route entry with an empty path as a nested route if you want to display something different here, a different components template, that is. Alright, so we made quite a few changes in this lecture. I apologize if you think the focus was not exclusively on nested routes, but I wanted to show you the changes in case you're following along. As always, you can download the code that is attached to this lecture if you want to take a closer look at it. So nested routes are useful for grouping together routes that are related and share some path prefix. If you don't want to structure your routes like this, perhaps to avoid having to use a route view tag within your template, then you can of course just add your routes as normal if you prefer. Nested routes are especially useful if you need to share some markup between some routes, because this markup can then be placed within the parent route.